Grant Whitmore found his mother above the tree line, behind a wall of mountain laurel, living inside an earth house the county called unsafe and the neighbors called a joke. Her hands were wrapped in cloth, her pantry shelves were nearly bare, and when she saw the bright survey flags planted across her land, she did not ask why he had come. She asked if he had come to finish taking everything. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 days earlier, Grant Whitmore still believed the mountain was already his. The conference room on the top floor of Whitmore Ridge Holdings looked out over the Blue Ridge Mountains like the world had been built for men who knew how to buy it. Glass walls, black walnut table, silver pens placed evenly beside folders thick with permits, appraisals, and investor summaries. Grant sat at the head of the table while Caleb Rourke stood near the screen, smiling like a man presenting victory. "The Ridge parcel is clean," Caleb said. "Final acquisition language is ready. Once you sign preliminary approval, we can move into investor's confirmation." Grant looked down at the rendering in front of him. A luxury mountain resort, private cabins, spa terraces, heated walkways, a restaurant cantilevered over the valley. It was beautiful. It was also expensive enough to ruin them if anything went wrong. "And the family restriction?" Grant asked. Caleb's smile barely moved. "Old paperwork. Your father filed strange things near the end. You know how he was." Grant did know how people talked about his father. Brilliant, difficult, obsessed with preparedness, a man who trusted stone, water, timber, and old maps more than banks or contractors. Grant had spent half his adult life proving he was not that man. He signed the approval. The room relaxed. Caleb clapped him once on the shoulder. "You just unlocked the ridge." Grant wanted to feel satisfied. Instead, as everyone began gathering papers, his phone buzzed. It was a call from the county records office. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the name, Helen Price. Helen had worked in county records long enough to remember documents other people wanted forgotten. She did not call unless something mattered. Grant stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly, "I'm sorry to bother you, but one parcel in today's filing still shows a protected notation." Grant's chest tightened. What kind of notation? One tied to Lydia Whitmore. His mother's name landed in the silence between them. Grant had not seen Lydia in nearly 3 years. Not properly, not face to face. Caleb had told him she refused visits. Her doctors had said pressure made her worse. Letters came back unanswered. Calls went through assistants, advocates, and then no one. "She's in assisted care," Grant said, though he did not know why he said it. Helen hesitated. "That is not the address listed here." Grant turned toward the glass wall. Outside, clouds dragged low over the ridgeline. "What address is listed?" Helen read it to him. It was not a facility. It was an old mountain parcel above Laurel Fork Road. Grant wrote it down slowly. When he returned to the conference room, Caleb was alone, sliding documents into a leather case. "Something wrong?" Caleb asked. Grant placed the address on the table. "Why is my mother listed on the ridge parcel?" Caleb glanced at it, then gave a tired little laugh. "Because county systems are prehistoric. Lydia had sentimental attachments to that land. We handled the consent months ago." "Handled how?" "With her authorization, with medical clearance, with legal review." Caleb closed the case. "Grant, don't let old guilt turn into bad business." Grant looked at the folder still open on the table. Lydia's consent form sat near the back. He pulled it closer. Her signature was there, Lydia A. Whitmore. But something about it looked wrong. Too smooth, too careful. His mother's handwriting had always leaned hard to the right, like the pen was trying to outrun the page. This signature sat upright. Grant stared at it too long. Caleb noticed. "She has good days and bad days," Caleb said gently. That was a good day. Grant wanted to ask more. He should have asked more. Instead, his eyes moved to the survey map beneath the form. A small black mark stood near the upper clearing, structure present. Grant tapped it. "I thought you said the site was abandoned." "It is," Caleb replied. "Old storage. Maybe part of your father's survival house nonsense. Nothing livable." Grant said nothing. On the wall-mounted television behind Caleb, a local weather alert rolled across the bottom of the screen. Winter storm watch issued for higher elevations, freezing rain possible by Friday evening. Caleb followed his gaze. All the more reason to keep moving. That ridge is no place for anyone fragile. Grant folded the map and slipped it into his coat. By sunset, he was driving up Laurel Fork Road alone. The pavement ended. Gravel took over, then mud. Bare branches scraped the side of his SUV as the road narrowed into the mountain. At the top of the ridge, he saw the survey flags first, bright orange, freshly planted. Then he saw the demolition stakes around the curved earthen house half hidden by trees, and smoke rising from a stone stove outside the door. Smoke rose from the stone stove in a thin gray ribbon, bending sideways in the mountain wind. Grant sat behind the wheel for several seconds, staring through the windshield as if the scene might correct itself if he waited long enough. The survey flags were real, the demolition stakes were real, and the small curved house pressed into the slope was real too, half hidden by rhododendron, leafless branches, and the deep green wall of mountain laurel. It did not look abandoned. A stack of split wood sat beneath a tarp beside the stove. A metal bucket hung from a hook. Someone had swept a path through the dead leaves from the door to the fire. The house itself rose from the earth in a low rounded shape, its walls the color of clay and old straw. It had no sharp roofline, no wide windows, no porch built for charm. It looked less like something constructed and more like something the mountain had decided to keep. Grant turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt larger than it should have. Wind moved through the trees. Somewhere high above him, a branch cracked and fell. He opened the door, stepped into the cold, and felt the mud give slightly beneath his polished shoes. He had dressed that morning for signatures, investors, and handshakes. Not for this. He moved toward the closest survey flag and pulled it from the ground. Bright orange tape snapped in the wind. The plastic stake came free too easily, leaving a narrow wound in the dark soil. A voice behind him said, "You should put that back before they accuse me of damaging their property." Grant turned. The woman stood between two laurel bushes, one hand braced against a tree trunk. For one terrible moment, he did not recognize his own mother. Lydia Whitmore had once carried herself with quiet force, the kind that made people lower their voices without knowing why. Now she looked smaller beneath a heavy wool coat patched at one elbow. Her silver hair was pinned loosely at the back of her head. Cloth strips were wrapped around both hands, stained from wood smoke and work, but her eyes were the same. Sharp, tired, wounded, Mom, Grant said. She did not move toward him. She looked at the survey flag in his hand, then at his SUV, then back at his face. "So Caleb sent you himself this time." The words hit harder than anger would have. "No," Grant said. "Caleb didn't send me." Lydia gave a small, humorless laugh. "Then you came on your own to watch it happen." Grant stepped closer, but she straightened immediately, and the movement stopped him. It was not fear exactly, it was defense. A practiced readiness. The kind of posture people learned when every kindness came with paper to sign afterward. "I didn't know you were here," he said. Her face changed, just slightly. Then it closed again. "You expect me to believe that? I thought you were in assisted care near Asheville." Lydia stared at him for a long moment. The wind pushed at the edge of her coat. Behind her, smoke continued to rise from the outdoor stove. "Assisted care," she repeated softly. "Is that what they told you?" Grant swallowed. "Caleb said you needed quiet. That visit's upset you. The doctors said..." "The doctors?" Lydia looked away toward the valley hidden beyond the trees. "Of course." He heard something in her voice then, not confusion, not weakness, exhaust. Grant took another step. "Mom, I called, I wrote, nothing came back." Her jaw tightened. "I wrote too." The simple sentence dropped between them like a stone into dark water. Grant opened his mouth, but no answer came. He remembered letters returned unopened. Messages passed through Caleb's office. Reports that Lydia was having difficult days. Every update had sounded responsible, compassionate, professional. Suddenly, standing in the cold mud, every one of them sounded like a locked door. Before he could speak, a truck engine growled from the lower bend in the road. An old green pickup climbed toward the clearing, tires spitting gravel. It stopped near Grant's SUV, and a broad-shouldered man in a canvas jacket climbed out. He had a weathered face, a gray beard, and the casual confidence of someone who believed the mountain belonged to whoever could outlast everyone else. He looked from Grant to Lydia and smirked. "Well, I'll be," he said. Mr. Whitmore finally came up to see the mud dome. Lydia's mouth tightened. Grant turned toward him. "Who are you?" "Roy Bell. Next parcel over." The man nodded toward the house. Been watching this thing sink into the hillside for years. Always figured one good winter storm would finish it. It's still standing, Lydia said. Roy shrugged. So is an old barn until the roof comes down. Grant looked back at the earthen house. Up close, it did not sag. It did not lean. The walls were thick, curved, and weathered smooth. Still, the place had no visible chimney, no power line, no real driveway, and no sign that anyone Lydia's age should have been surviving there alone. Why is there a stove outside? Grant asked before he could stop himself. Lydia's eyes moved to him. Something like disappointment passed across her face. Roy laughed. That's the part everybody loves. Your daddy built a house with no proper heat inside it. Fire outside, mud walls, straw mixed in. Whole thing's a bad idea pretending to be wisdom. Grant did not like hearing his father mentioned that way, though he had spent years thinking almost the same thing in quieter language. Roy walked toward the stone stove and kicked lightly at a loose rock near its base. Lydia flinched. Grant noticed. Don't touch it, she said. Roy lifted both hands, still smiling. Easy. Caleb just asked me to keep an eye on things before the inspection. Nobody wants you getting hurt. Caleb asked you? Grant said. Roy glanced at him, then seemed to realize he had said too much. He talks to folks, that's all. Big project like this, everybody wants to know where they stand. And where do you stand? Grant asked. Roy's smirk returned. Depends how fast this place gets cleared. Some of us got land worth more once the resort road goes through. Lydia's eyes lowered to the ground, but not in shame, in restraint. Grant saw it then. The whole ridge had been waiting for her to disappear, not die, not recover. Just become inconvenient enough that people could call removal kindness. He turned to his mother. Come with me tonight. We'll get you somewhere warm. Then we'll figure this out. Lydia looked at the SUV again, and her face hardened. No, Mom, this isn't safe. You don't know what is safe. You're alone up here. I was made alone. Her voice did not rise, but it cut through him. That's different. Roy shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, he stopped smiling. Grant lowered his voice. I'm not asking you to sign anything. I'm asking you to get out of the cold. Lydia looked at his hands, then at his coat, then at the pulled survey flag lying near his shoe. That's how it starts, she said. A ride, a warm room, a clean shirt. Then someone puts a folder in front of you and says it's only routine. Grant went still. Before he could answer, the wind lifted a loose sheet of paper from the side of a nearby shed. It slapped against the wood, half torn but still pinned beneath a rusted nail. Grant walked over and pulled it free. It was a county notice, final exterior inspection scheduled following weather clearance. Below that, in colder language, were the words that made his stomach tighten. Demolition eligibility review pending. Structure listed as uninhabitable by authorized representative. Grant read the notice twice. The words did not change. Demolition eligibility review pending. Structure listed as uninhabitable by authorized representative. His eyes moved to the bottom of the page. There was a signature, not Lydia's. Someone had signed as acting representative. The name was partially obscured by water stains, but one thing was clear. Lydia had not signed this document herself. Who authorized this? Grant asked. Lydia did not answer immediately. Roy Bell suddenly seemed interested in the trees. The silence told Grant almost as much as words would have. Finally, Lydia spoke. That's what I've been trying to tell people. Her voice sounded tired rather than angry. They keep making decisions for me. Grant folded the notice carefully and slid it into his coat pocket. It was the first thing he had physically taken possession of since arriving. The first piece of evidence. Roy shifted his weight. Look, nobody's trying to hurt her. Lydia laughed softly. The sound contained no amusement, no, just erase me. Roy's expression hardened. That's not fair. Then explain the flags. He couldn't. Instead, he looked toward Grant. You should talk to Caleb. I plan to. Roy climbed back into his truck without another word. The engine started. A moment later, he disappeared down the ridge road. The clearing became quiet again. Grant looked at Lydia. For the first time since arriving, they were alone. The distance between them felt larger than the entire mountain. You really wrote to me? He asked. Lydia nodded. More than once. When? Last spring. The winter before that, after they started bringing surveyors. Grant felt something cold settle in his stomach. I never got anything. I know. The answer came too quickly, as if she had already accepted that fact long ago. Grant looked away toward the house. A life had been happening here while he attended board meetings, investor dinners and charity galas. And somehow he knew almost nothing about it. "Can I see the house?" he asked. Lydia studied him. The request seemed to surprise her. "You used to hate this place." Grant almost corrected her, then stopped, because she wasn't wrong. For years he had avoided conversations about his father and the mountain, avoided memories of unfinished projects and strange preparedness plans that had embarrassed him when he was younger. He had spent decades building something sleek and modern, everything his father had not been. Maybe Caleb had noticed that. Maybe Caleb had used it. "I was wrong about a lot of things," Grant said quietly. Lydia looked at him for several seconds. Then she turned and walked toward the earthen structure. "Come on." The doorway was lower than he expected. Grant had to duck slightly to enter. The moment he stepped inside, he stopped. The air felt different, not warm exactly, not cold either. Stable. Outside, mountain wind moved through bare branches. Inside, everything felt strangely calm. His eyes adjusted slowly. The walls curved organically around the interior, no sharp corners, no wasted space. Shelves emerged directly from thick earthen walls. Storage compartments were built into the structure itself. Simple furniture sat exactly where it needed to be. Nothing more, nothing less. The place should have felt primitive. Instead, it felt deliberate. Lydia noticed him looking. Still standing after 20 years, Grant ran a hand along the wall. The surface was solid, dry, not crumbling, not fragile. Nothing like the image Caleb had described. He walked deeper into the room. No mold, no leaks, no frozen pipes. Lydia removed her coat and hung it on a wooden peg. "Funny how the dangerous house keeps surviving." Grant frowned. "Then why does everyone want it gone?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Lydia froze, only for a second, but Grant noticed. When she turned back toward him, something had changed. Fear. Not for herself, for something else. "They don't care about the house. What do they care about?" Lydia looked toward the floor, toward the center of the room, then immediately away. The movement was subtle, but Grant caught it, a habit from years of negotiating business deals. People always looked toward what mattered, even when they tried not to. "What is it?" he asked. "Nothing." The answer came too quickly. Grant followed her gaze again. The floor looked ordinary enough. Stone, clay, handcrafted surfaces. Yet near the center sat a broad stone slab unlike the rest, older, smoother, almost intentionally placed. Before he could ask another question, Lydia moved between him and it. A clear signal. Not now. Grant let it go, for the moment. Instead, he walked toward a narrow shelf near the wall. Several folders sat there, a radio, a flashlight, and a stack of unopened envelopes. Grant picked one up. His name was written across the front. The handwriting was unmistakably Lydia's. His pulse jumped. He picked up another, and another. Every one addressed to him. None opened, none returned, just waiting. Years of silence suddenly acquired weight, physical weight. Lydia saw what he was holding. Neither spoke. Grant carefully set the letters back down. His throat felt tight, not because of what they contained, because of what they represented. Someone had decided he should never read them. The realization hurt more than he expected. A sharp knock sounded against the doorframe. Both of them turned. An older woman stood outside, late 60s, heavy coat, gray hair tucked beneath a knit cap. She looked relieved when she saw Lydia, then surprised when she noticed Grant. "Sorry," she said, "I didn't know you had company." Lydia's posture relaxed slightly. "You're fine, Nora." Nora stepped inside. Her eyes widened. "Grant Whitmore?" Grant nodded. The woman stared for a moment, then something resembling anger crossed her face. Not hostility, disappointment. "Well," she said, "took long enough." Grant accepted the blow. He had earned it. Nora set a grocery bag on the table, canned soup, dried beans, coffee, a few basic supplies. Lydia immediately tried to protest. Nora ignored her. "We're expecting weather, I know." "No, worse than usual." Nora looked toward Grant. "The county's talking about freezing rain." Grant frowned. The same warning he had seen earlier, but Nora seemed concerned for another reason. She lowered her voice. "Survey crews were up here again yesterday." Lydia went still. "They came back?" Nora nodded. "They weren't measuring roads." The room suddenly felt smaller. "What were they measuring?" Grant asked. Nora looked uncertain. Then she reached into her coat pocket. "I found this after they left." She handed him a folded sheet. Grant opened it. At first it looked like an ordinary survey map. Then he saw the markings, red circles, elevation notes, structural references, and one label positioned directly beneath Lydia's house. subsurface chamber. Grant's heart skipped. The room fell silent. Lydia's face drained of color. Nora looked between them. What does that mean? No one answered. Because for the first time since arriving on the mountain, Grant realized something terrifying. Whoever wanted Lydia's house gone wasn't guessing. They were looking for something specific underneath it. Grant stared at the map in his hands. Subsurface chamber. The words were printed in red engineering shorthand near the center of the structure. Not a guess, not a rumor, a notation. Someone had surveyed beneath the house. Someone knew enough to look. The silence inside the earthen home stretched until Nora finally spoke. Should I not have brought that? No, Lydia said quietly. You did the right thing. Grant looked at his mother. The fear in her face was different now. Not fear of losing the house. Fear of losing whatever was underneath it. He folded the map carefully. How many people know about this? Lydia didn't answer. That answer was answer enough. Not many. Nora excused herself a few minutes later. Weather was moving in faster than expected, and the mountain roads became dangerous after dark. Before leaving, she placed a hand briefly on Lydia's shoulder. Call if you need anything. Lydia nodded. After the truck disappeared down the road, the mountain became quiet again. Grant waited. Eventually, Lydia sat near the small table built into the wall. The fading afternoon light painted long shadows across the floor. You should tell me what's under there. Her eyes drifted toward the center of the room. No, Grant exhaled slowly. Mom, no. The second answer carried decades of stubbornness. Grant almost argued. Instead, he sat down across from her. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Lydia surprised him. Do you know what the hardest part was? Grant looked up. What? Not losing the land. Her voice remained calm. Not the letters. She glanced toward the unopened stack bearing his name. The hardest part was realizing how easy it was. Grant felt the words hit somewhere deep. Lydia continued staring at the wall. One doctor, one lawyer, one man people trusted. Her jaw tightened. And suddenly I became someone everyone talked about instead of talking to. Grant didn't know what to say, because part of him knew she wasn't only talking about Caleb. She was talking about him too. The room felt smaller, more honest, and far more uncomfortable than any boardroom he'd ever entered. Finally he stood. I'm going to verify everything. Lydia looked at him. How? The same way I'd verify a land dispute. A faint sadness crossed her face. That's the problem. Grant frowned. What is you still think this is a land dispute? The words followed him long after he stepped outside. The temperature had dropped sharply. Clouds gathered over the ridgeline. A storm front. Earlier than forecast. Grant pulled out his phone. 1 week bar. Enough. He scrolled through old contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in years. Helen Price. County Records. She answered on the third ring. Grant? I need a favor. 20 minutes later, he sat inside his SUV reviewing photos he'd taken of the demolition notice, survey map, and consent documents. Helen listened quietly. When he mentioned Lydia's listed address, she became silent, then very silent. Finally, she spoke. You're telling me she's actually living there? Yes, and competent? Grant thought about their conversation, about her suspicion, her memory, her anger. Very. Helen sighed. Then somebody's going to have serious problems. The statement sharpened his attention. What aren't you telling me? Paper shuffled on the other end. I can't discuss protected records. Helen. Another pause. Then her voice lowered. I can tell you there's something unusual. Grant leaned forward. What? The transfer file was moved. What does that mean? It means someone requested special handling. Grant's stomach tightened. County records rarely moved unless litigation, probate, or significant ownership disputes were involved. Who requested it? I can't legally tell you. But if I were you, I'd stop focusing on the land transfer. Grant's pulse quickened. What should I focus on? The medical authorization attached to it. Silence. Cold silence. Because that wasn't where he'd been looking. The call ended minutes later. Grant remained in the vehicle, staring at the dark windshield. The medical authorization. Not the transfer. Not the land. The authorization. Whatever happened there had started everything. He climbed out and returned toward the house. Halfway there he noticed something. Fresh tire tracks. Not Nora's. Different tread pattern. Larger vehicle. Recent. His eyes followed them around the side of the property, toward the lower ridge, toward a clearing partially hidden by trees. Grant moved carefully. The tracks ended near several survey markers. The ground looked disturbed. He crouched. Recent drilling, small core samples, several of them. His jaw tightened. Someone had been examining the earth beneath the house, not the structure, the ground itself, exactly where the map indicated. A noise behind him made him turn sharply. Lydia stood several yards away. She looked furious. Not frightened, furious. "What are you doing?" Grant pointed toward the drill marks. "These are recent, I know. You knew?" "Of course I knew." The wind rose between them. Branches shifted overhead. Grant stepped closer. "Then why didn't you tell me?" Lydia laughed bitterly. "Because every time I tell someone the truth, they call me confused." The words landed hard. For a moment neither spoke. Then she pointed toward the house. "Come inside." Her tone had changed. Urgent, serious. Grant followed. Once inside, Lydia locked the door. Actually locked it. The movement surprised him. She rarely seemed afraid for herself. Now she looked worried. She walked directly to one of the shelves built into the wall, moved several jars, then reached behind them. Grant froze. A hidden compartment. Lydia pulled out an old metal box. The container was dented with age. Its surface carried rust marks and scratches, but the lock remained intact. She set it carefully on the table. For several seconds she simply stared at it, as if deciding something. Finally she looked at Grant. "You asked why they want the house." Grant nodded. Lydia placed a hand on the metal box. "You're asking the wrong question." The room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, distant thunder rolled through the mountains, slow, heavy, approaching. Lydia swallowed, then said the one thing Grant never expected to hear. "They don't want the house." Her fingers tightened on the box. "They want what your father hid before he died." And for the first time, she slid a small key from around her neck. The key trembled slightly in Lydia's hand. Not because she was weak, because she had spent years protecting something she no longer trusted herself to reveal. Thunder rolled again across the mountains. Grant remained standing beside the table. "What did Dad hide?" Lydia looked at the metal box for several seconds before answering. "Proof." Grant frowned. "Proof of what?" "That everything Caleb built his deal on was a lie." The words landed heavily. Lydia inserted the key. The lock clicked, a small sound, but it seemed louder than the storm outside. She lifted the lid. Inside were documents wrapped in oilcloth, several engineering notebooks, and a thick sealed envelope marked in his father's handwriting. "For Lydia only. Do not file with Canty Records." Grant recognized the handwriting immediately. His chest tightened. He had not seen it in years. Lydia carefully removed the envelope. "You can read this now." Grant hesitated. "You never opened it?" "I did." Her eyes remained fixed on the papers, many times. The room grew quiet. Grant unfolded the first pages. At first they looked like ordinary engineering notes, measurements, heat calculations, ventilation diagrams, but then he noticed references to legal parcel numbers, trust restrictions, emergency access rights, community use designations. This was more than a house, much more. His father had designed an integrated survival shelter, a structure intended to remain operational during long-term utility failures, storms, and emergencies. The mountain house had never been a private experiment. It had been planned as a protected resource. Grant continued reading, then he stopped. A single paragraph caught his attention. "If future ownership disputes arise, attached survey data confirms the protected ridge boundary differs from county development maps filed after 2008. Grant looked up sharply. "What is this?" Lydia closed her eyes. "The real reason they want the property." Grant turned several pages. More survey maps appeared, older maps, certified maps. The boundary lines were different, significantly different. His pulse accelerated. The luxury ridge project, the resort expansion, several proposed construction zones. According to these records, portions of that land never belonged inside the development area. Grant felt his stomach drop. "That's impossible." "No," Lydia said quietly. "It isn't." He spread the maps across the table. Years of negotiations flashed through his mind. Investor meetings, land valuations, environmental reviews, expansion projections. If these documents were accurate, then Caleb had promised investors access to acreage he could never legally guarantee. The realization made Grant cold, not because of money, because Caleb would have known. No one working at that level could make that mistake accidentally. Outside, rain began striking the roof, slow at first, then harder. Grant forced himself to keep reading. More documents appeared beneath the engineering notes, letters, survey correspondence, legal opinions. and one particular letter from a retired surveyor named Thomas Reed. Grant recognized the name. One of the oldest licensed surveyors in the county. The letter was dated years earlier. It warned that revised boundary filings appeared inconsistent with original trust surveys. No response was attached. No follow-up, nothing. As if the warning had simply vanished, Grant looked toward Lydia. "You showed this to someone?" "I tried." "Who? A lawyer?" "What happened?" A bitter smile appeared. "He stopped returning my calls." Grant didn't need further explanation, influence, pressure, money, maybe all three. For the first time he fully understood how isolated Lydia had become. Not because she lacked evidence, because every path to use it had been quietly blocked. The storm intensified, wind rattled the walls. Yet the house remained steady, warm, secure. Grant glanced around. All these years he had been embarrassed by this place, ashamed of it, ashamed of the stories people told about his father, the eccentric mountain builder, the man obsessed with preparedness, the man wealthy people laughed about at charity dinners. Now Grant saw something different. His father had been right, and people like Caleb needed him to look foolish. Otherwise someone might ask why they worked so hard to erase his legacy. The realization hurt more than Grant expected, because he had helped them, not deliberately, but effectively. He had spent years staying away, avoiding uncomfortable conversations, accepting convenient explanations. He thought of the signed approvals sitting on his desk, the resort authorizations, the investor agreements. His name carried weight, and Caleb had used that weight against Lydia. A sharp knock struck the door. All thought vanished instantly. Lydia froze. Another knock followed harder. Grant moved toward the window. Headlights. 2 vehicles, not county vehicles, not emergency crews, black SUVs. His chest tightened. Only a handful of people used vehicles like that on mountain roads. And he knew exactly who one of them belonged to. The driver's door opened. Caleb stepped into the rain. Even from a distance, Grant recognized the expensive coat and confident posture. Lydia whispered something under her breath, not fear, disgust. A second man emerged from the passenger side. Grant didn't recognize him. Suit, briefcase, probably an attorney. The knock came again. Caleb called through the door. "Grant," no response. "I know you're in there." The storm swallowed the silence afterward. Grant looked toward Lydia. What does he know? Enough. That answer wasn't comforting. Another knock, then Caleb's voice again. "I came because this situation has gotten out of control." Grant almost laughed. Out of control, after 3 years of lies, after forged documents, after isolation, after demolition notices. Now it was suddenly out of control. Grant stepped closer to the door. "Go away." Caleb sounded patient, almost concerned. The same voice investors trusted. The same voice that convinced people everything was reasonable. "Grant, you're being manipulated." Lydia looked away, not surprised, not even angry anymore, just tired. The phrase had probably been used against her countless times. Caleb continued, "That house isn't safe." Grant's eyes drifted toward the thick earthen walls, the warm interior, the storm raging outside. The irony was almost unbearable. A loud crack echoed from somewhere down the ridge. Treefall. The storm was worsening. Then Caleb spoke again, and this time his words changed everything. "Before you make any decisions, ask your mother about the second set of documents." Grant slowly turned. Lydia's face had gone pale. The shift was immediate, visible, real. Caleb knew it too. His voice came softer now, more dangerous. "Ask her why she never showed you those." Grant stared at Lydia. She looked suddenly older, not weak, burdened, as if a weight she had carried for years had finally caught up with her. Outside, rain hammered the mountain. Inside, nobody moved. Then Caleb delivered one final sentence through the door. "The papers in that box aren't the whole story." And for the first time since Grant found her, Lydia seemed afraid of what he might learn next. The silence inside the house lasted longer than the storm outside. Grant kept staring at Lydia. She had spent the last few days insisting Caleb was lying, manipulating, and hiding evidence. Now Caleb had pointed to a second set of documents, and for the first time she looked cornered. Another knock struck the door. Grant ignored it. "Lydia." She flinched slightly at the sound of her own name. "What documents?" Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "They don't change what Caleb did." "That's not what I asked." Outside, Caleb waited. Inside, the air felt heavier than the mountain weather. Finally, Lydia pulled a deep breath. There was another trust amendment. Grant's pulse quickened. What kind of amendment? One your father drafted near the end of his life. The answer only created more questions. Where is it? I destroyed my copy. Grant stared at her. For a moment he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. You what? I burned it. The admission landed like a blow. Outside, thunder rolled across the ridge. Grant looked away. He needed a second to process what she had just said. All week he had been uncovering evidence that people had hidden the truth from Lydia. Now he was learning Lydia had hidden part of it from him. The realization hurt more than he expected, not because of the document, because trust had only begun to return between them. And suddenly another crack appeared in it. Why? His voice came out quieter than he intended. Lydia looked toward the stove. For the same reason I didn't call you. Grant laughed bitterly. That doesn't answer anything. No. Her eyes met his. It answers everything. For a long moment neither spoke. Then she stood. Slowly, carefully, not fragile, simply exhausted. She crossed to a shelf near the wall and removed a faded notebook. The cover was worn smooth from years of use. She placed it in front of Grant. Your father kept notes. Grant opened it. Most pages contained maintenance records for the house, fuel usage, temperature readings, repairs. Then he reached a section dated only months before his father's death. Several entries mentioned Grant by name. Grant's chest tightened. He continued reading. Your son wants nothing to do with this place. Maybe that's my fault. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe he sees these mountains and only sees poverty. The words felt like a knife. Grant swallowed hard. More entries followed. I worry that after we're gone, people with money will come for the ridge. Not strangers. The dangerous ones will be people who believe they know better. People who call ownership progress. Grant closed the notebook for a moment. His father had seen it coming. Years before Caleb ever appeared. Years before luxury developments reached the mountain. The old man had understood exactly what would happen. Lydia sat down again. He wanted to protect the house. Grant nodded. So he created the trust. Yes. Then why destroy the amendment? A flash of pain crossed her face, real pain. The kind people carried for years. Because it would have destroyed what little family I had left. The answer chilled him. Outside, Caleb's voice came through the door again. Grant, no response. You're hearing one side of this. Grant still didn't move. The attorney standing beside Caleb remained silent, watching, waiting. Grant hated that. Lawyers rarely came into storms unless someone expected a fight. Back inside, he returned his attention to Lydia. What did the amendment say? She hesitated. Too long, then she answered. It gave you control. Grant frowned. What? If I was declared permanently incapable. The room fell silent again. Grant felt his stomach tighten. That wasn't shocking. It was logical, expected even. But Lydia's expression told him there was more, much more. That's not the whole thing, no. What else? She looked away. The storm rattled the windows. Finally she spoke. The amendment removed the property's community protection if the controlling trustee approved redevelopment. Grant froze. Every piece suddenly began sliding into place. The resort, the trust, the forged evaluations, the attempts to declare Lydia incompetent, the pressure campaign, the isolation. If Lydia lost legal authority and Grant inherited control, the trust protections could disappear, not automatically, but potentially, depending on the amendment's language. Grant's heart sank. Caleb had never needed Lydia's cooperation. He needed control to pass through her, to someone easy to influence, someone distracted, someone who trusted him. Grant. The realization made him feel sick. Lydia saw it happen, saw the understanding reach him. Now you know why I burned it. Grant slowly shook his head. No, I didn't trust what Caleb would do. You didn't trust me. The words escaped before he could stop them. Lydia didn't argue. That hurt more than any defense would have. Outside, another vehicle engine echoed faintly through the storm. Caleb turned. The attorney turned. Everyone noticed. Grant stepped toward the window. Headlights climbed the ridge, a county truck. The sight surprised him. No one should have been driving those roads tonight. The truck stopped near the gate. A woman stepped out. Even through the rain, Grant recognized her. Mara Ellison, the adult care advocate. What was she doing here? Caleb clearly wasn't expecting her either. He walked toward her immediately. The two began talking. Grant couldn't hear the conversation, but he could read body language. Caleb was no longer relaxed. No longer confident. Something had changed. Mara handed him a folder. Caleb opened it. His expression shifted, just slightly, but enough. Grant had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals. He knew exactly what controlled panic looked like. Mara then pointed toward the house, toward Lydia, toward the mountain itself. Caleb said something sharp. Mara didn't back down. A few moments later, she returned to her truck, but instead of leaving, she remained parked at the gate, watching, waiting, almost like security. Grant looked back at Lydia. "Did you tell Mara about the amendment?" "No." "Then why is she here?" "I don't know." The answer felt genuine. A phone buzzed. Grant looked down, his satellite phone. The signal was weak but alive. One unread message from Mara, sent only minutes earlier. He opened it. The message contained only 3 sentences. "Do not sign anything. Do not let Caleb inside. I found the original notary record." Grant's pulse accelerated. Notary record, that meant paperwork, verification, evidence, something official, something difficult to fake. He immediately called. No connection, storm interference. He tried again. Nothing. The signal vanished. Grant stared at the screen, then at the message, then back toward the gate. The original notary record. If it existed, it could confirm who signed what and when, maybe even expose the forged documents entirely. But one question wouldn't leave his mind. Why had Mara rushed up a mountain in the middle of a dangerous storm just to warn them? Unless what she found was even bigger than the forged signatures. Grant looked down again. There was an attachment beneath the message, a scanned image, partially downloaded, only half visible. The storm had interrupted the transfer. Most of the page remained blurred, unreadable, but one section had loaded. One line, one signature block, and beneath it appeared a name Grant never expected to see connected to the trust. Not Caleb Rourke, not Lydia Whitmore, not his father, his own name. And according to the partially visible date, someone had signed it nearly 2 years ago. Grant had absolutely no memory of doing so. Grant stared at the blurred image on his phone. The storm interfered with the download, leaving most of the document unreadable. But the signature block remained clear enough to recognize. His name was there. Grant Whitmore, dated almost 2 years earlier. The timestamp alone made no sense. He searched his memory immediately. Board meetings, investor presentations, land acquisitions. Hundreds of documents crossed his desk every month. Yet something about this felt different. Important. Dangerous. Outside, Caleb remained near the vehicles. He couldn't see the phone screen, but somehow Grant felt as if the man already knew exactly what Mara had found. Lydia watched his face. "What is it?" Grant handed her the phone. She adjusted her glasses and looked carefully. The color drained from her face. "Oh no." Grant immediately noticed her reaction. "You've seen this before." Lydia lowered the phone slowly. "Not this copy, but you've seen something." She nodded. Years of exhaustion suddenly appeared behind her eyes. "I thought it was gone." The answer only deepened the mystery. Thunder cracked somewhere above the ridge. The house barely reacted. The thick earthen walls absorbed the noise the same way they absorbed cold. Grant placed the phone on the table. "Tell me." Lydia remained silent for several moments. Then she stood and walked toward the thermal chamber. The hidden compartment beneath the floor was still partially exposed from the repairs. Warm air rose steadily from below. She knelt beside it and reached deeper into the cavity. Grant hadn't realized there was more storage beneath the stonework. After a few seconds, she pulled out another metal container, smaller, older. Unlike the first box, this one had rust around the hinges. Lydia carried it to the table. Her hands moved carefully, almost reluctantly. "I hoped this would never matter." Grant sat forward. Inside the container were receipts, correspondence, and several folded legal papers. Most appeared decades old. Then Lydia removed a single envelope. It had never been opened. Across the front, in his father's handwriting, were 4 words. "Only if Grant signs." Grant felt a chill. His father had written this years ago. Long before the resort. Long before Caleb. Long before any of this. Yet somehow it connected directly to the document on Mara's phone. Lydia placed the envelope between them. "I never opened it." Grant frowned. "You opened everything else, not this." "Why? Because your father told me not to." The answer sounded absurd, yet somehow entirely believable. The old man had been meticulous. The notebooks proved that. If he left instructions, Lydia followed them. Grant carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter, nothing else, no legal forms, no maps, no diagrams. Just a letter. He began reading. "If this letter is open, it means someone convinced my son to sign something connected to the trust." Grant's heartbeat accelerated. The words felt impossible. His father had written them years before his death. Yet somehow the sentence described exactly what appeared to be happening now. He continued reading. If that day comes, assume the document was presented as routine business. Assume pressure was applied through convenience rather than force. The people most likely to steal this mountain will never call themselves thieves. Grant stopped. Every sentence felt directed him personally. Every sentence felt accurate. The letter continued. They will tell him the ridge is underused. They will call preservation wasteful. They will use progress as a disguise. Lydia looked away. She had clearly read parts of the letter before, or perhaps she simply remembered hearing similar warnings from her husband. Grant read on. If Grant knowingly chooses development, that is his right. But if he signs without understanding the trust, the signature should never be considered informed consent. A name appeared at the bottom. Thomas Reed, the surveyor, the same surveyor who had written warnings years earlier. Grant immediately looked up. Why is Reed's name here? Lydia frowned. He helped your father establish the boundary markers. How close were they? Close enough that your father trusted him. Grant leaned back. Another piece slid into place. Thomas Reed, the survey maps, the warnings, the trust, the amendment. Everything seemed connected. But one question remained. Where was Reed now? As if reading his thoughts, Lydia answered, He's still alive. Grant looked up sharply. What? He retired years ago. I thought he was gone. No, the old woman shook her head. He lives near Asheville. Grant immediately reached for his phone. No signal, nothing. The storm remained too strong. Frustration hit him hard. Every answer seemed one step away, always just out of reach. Outside, headlights suddenly moved. Grant looked through the window. Caleb's attorney was walking toward Mara's truck. The interaction appeared brief, tense. Then the attorney returned quickly. Mara remained parked, watching, waiting, protecting something or someone. Grant didn't like uncertainty, especially not now. The more evidence surfaced, the more desperate Caleb seemed to become. And desperate people made mistakes or dangerous decisions. The phone buzzed again. Weak signal. A partial update downloaded. More of Mara's attachment appeared. Grant opened it immediately. The image sharpened. Additional text became visible. Not enough to read everything, enough to understand the document's purpose. His stomach tightened. It wasn't a trust amendment. It wasn't a property transfer. It was a notarized acknowledgement. A document confirming receipt of information. Grant stared. The wording suggested someone had provided him with materials related to the trust nearly 2 years earlier. Materials he supposedly reviewed and accepted. That changed everything, because if true, Caleb could argue Grant already knew about the restrictions, already knew about Lydia's authority, already knew about the protected ridge, and ignored it. The legal consequences alone were terrifying, but the personal consequences were worse. Lydia saw his expression. What does it say? Grant handed her the phone. She read silently, then closed her eyes. No. What? No, that's impossible. Why? Her answer came instantly. Because you weren't there. Grant froze. Lydia looked directly at him. I remember that week. The date? Yes. How? Because it was the week I tried to reach you. The room fell silent. Grant waited. Lydia swallowed. I drove to your resort office myself. His eyes widened. You never told me that. I never got inside. Grant stared. What happened? The answer came softly. Caleb met me in the parking lot. The air seemed to leave the room. Outside, rain hammered the mountain. Inside, neither moved. For years, Grant had believed Lydia simply withdrew, that she stopped trying, that she wanted distance. Now another version of history emerged, one where she had actually come looking for him, and Caleb had been standing between them. Lydia continued. He told me you were in a meeting. Grant said nothing. He told me you didn't want mountain problems brought into your business. Her voice cracked slightly, just once. He told me not to come back. Grant looked away. The shame arrived fast, sharp, heavy, because the story sounded exactly like something he would have believed at the time, exactly like something Caleb knew he would believe. His phone buzzed one final time. A new message from Mara, only 6 words. I found the notary, he's alive. Grant read the message twice, then 3 times. The notary, the person who could confirm whether Grant actually signed the document, or whether someone had signed it for him. The storm continued outside, but suddenly the mountain no longer felt isolated. For the first time, there was a living witness, and if that witness talked, Everything Caleb had built might begin to collapse. Grant read Mara's message 3 more times. The notary was alive. A living witness meant something very different from paperwork. Documents could be challenged. Memories could be questioned. But a witness who had participated directly in the process could change everything, especially if Caleb had believed that witness was gone. Outside, the storm finally began losing strength. Rain still fell, but the violent wind had eased. The mountain seemed to be catching its breath. Grant walked back to the window. Mara remained near the gate. Caleb was pacing now. That alone told him something. The calm confidence Caleb carried into every negotiation was beginning to crack. Lydia noticed it too. He's worried. Grant nodded. He should be. For the first time since arriving at the mountain, the words felt true, not hopeful, not emotional, simply true. The balance was changing. His phone vibrated again. This time the signal held long enough for a brief call. Grant answered immediately. Mara, can you hear me? Barely. Good enough. Her voice sounded exhausted. She had likely spent hours fighting weather, roads, and bureaucracy to reach the ridge. What did you find? A pause. Then Mara answered carefully. I found Harold Bennett. Grant frowned. The name meant nothing to him. The notary? Yes. He remembered the trust paperwork? He remembers far more than that. Grant's grip tightened around the phone. Mara continued. Harold says the document wasn't signed where the record claims. Grant looked toward Lydia. Her attention sharpened immediately. What does that mean? It means the notarized location is probably false. Silence filled the room. False locations, false signatures, false evaluations. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Grant lowered his voice. Did he confirm I signed it? Another pause. Longer this time. No, his pulse jumped. What do you mean no? He says he never personally witnessed you sign anything. Grant closed his eyes. The relief arrived first, then anger. Deep anger. Not because his name had been forged, because someone had expected him never to notice, never to care, never to look. Mara wasn't finished. Grant. What? There's something worse. The words immediately erased any relief. Go on. Harold says the signature appointment involved another witness. Grant felt a knot form in his stomach. Who? He doesn't remember the name. Then how is that worse? Because he remembers the face. The connection crackled. Rain hissed against the roof. Grant waited. Then Mara said something that made his blood run cold. He says the witness worked for your company. Grant looked toward the scattered documents on the table. Everything suddenly felt closer. More personal. This wasn't some distant fraud committed by strangers. Somebody inside his organization had helped, knowingly or not. A line had been crossed, and that meant Caleb hadn't been acting alone. The signal broke. The call ended. Grant immediately tried calling back. Nothing. No connection. The mountain had taken the signal again. Lydia remained silent until he lowered the phone. Then she asked the question he had been avoiding. Who else knew? Grant didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was terrifying, he didn't know. Board members, executives, legal staff, consultants, assistants. The resort project involved hundreds of people. Any one of them could have touched the paperwork. Any one of them could have helped Caleb, or been manipulated by him. For years Grant had assumed control meant visibility. Now he was discovering the opposite. Power created blind spots. The larger his company became, the easier it was for dangerous people to hide inside it. A loud engine suddenly echoed from outside. Both Grant and Lydia looked toward the window. One of Caleb's SUVs was leaving. Fast. Too fast for the conditions. The vehicle disappeared down the ridge road. Grant frowned. Where's he going? Lydia moved beside him. They watched the taillights vanish into darkness. Caleb remained behind. His attorney remained behind. Only one vehicle had left. And suddenly Grant understood. He's moving something. Lydia's eyes narrowed, or someone. The possibility hit hard. If Caleb realized a witness existed, he might already be trying to reach that witness. Not necessarily to threaten him. People like Caleb preferred cleaner solutions, persuasion, settlements, pressure, reputation management. All the respectable words wealthy people used when they wanted problems to disappear. Grant grabbed his coat. Lydia looked at him sharply. What are you doing? I can't stay here. Yes, you can. He'll get there first. You don't even know where he's going. Grant stopped. Because she was right. Emotion was beginning to outrun reason. Exactly what Caleb wanted. Lydia pointed toward the table. The evidence stays here. Grant followed her gaze, the maps, the trust records, the notebooks, the letters, the thermal core documentation. Years of proof sat in front of them. Caleb knew some of it existed, but not all of it, not yet. If Grant left and something happened to the house, the evidence could disappear. The realization settled him, barely, but enough. He sat down again. Outside, headlights remained parked near the gate. Mara, watching, protecting, waiting for morning. Hours passed slowly, the storm weakened further. Near midnight, Lydia finally fell asleep in a chair beside the stove. Grant remained awake, reading, reviewing, connecting pieces. The more he studied the trust papers, the more one detail stood out. A reference repeated several times. Archive B, not a room, not a filing cabinet, an archive. The term appeared in engineering notes and trust correspondence alike. Grant searched the boxes. Nothing. No explanation, no location. Just repeated references. Archive B contains duplicate records. Archive B remains off-site. Archive B activated if primary trust documents are compromised. His pulse quickened. Duplicate records. His father had created a backup. Of course he had. The man designed survival systems. Why wouldn't he design a survival system for paperwork too? Grant continued searching. Nearly an hour later, he found a folded page tucked into the back of one notebook. Most of it contained maintenance notes. One corner held a hand-drawn map, simple, rough, unlabeled, except for a single mark B. He studied it carefully, a ridge, a creek, an abandoned fire road. The location appeared several miles away, far beyond the house, far beyond the resort boundary, and written beneath it in his father's handwriting were 6 words. If trust is challenged, go here. Grant stared at the map, a backup archive, hidden somewhere in the mountains, potentially untouched for years. Potentially holding records nobody else knew existed, the kind of records that could either destroy Caleb's defense or destroy Grant's. Because if duplicate documents existed, they might reveal exactly what had happened 2 years ago, and exactly whose signature appeared on that missing paperwork. Outside, dawn remained hours away. Inside, Grant folded the map carefully. Then he noticed something else, a second line written faintly along the edge of the paper, so faint he almost missed it. Not safe if Roy knows. Grant froze. Roy Bell, the neighbor, the man who mocked the house, the man who supported the demolition, the man Caleb kept close. Suddenly the hidden archive felt far more vulnerable than Grant had imagined, and somewhere down the mountain, one of Caleb's vehicles was already racing through the night. The first gray light of dawn spread across the mountains as Grant folded the map and slipped it inside his jacket. He had not slept, neither had the mountain. Mist hung low between the ridges, and melting ice dripped steadily from branches around Lydia's house. The storm had passed, but its damage remained everywhere. Lydia was already awake when he stepped outside. She stood near the outdoor stove, feeding small pieces of wood into the fire with practiced movements. For years, people had called her confused, fragile, unstable. Watching her now, Grant felt ashamed that he had ever accepted those descriptions without question. She looked tired, but she looked certain. There was a difference. You found something, she said without looking at him. Grant nodded, a backup archive. That made her freeze. For the first time in days, real surprise crossed her face. You found the map? You knew about it? Lydia slowly turned toward him. I knew your father created one. Her eyes drifted toward the mountains beyond the ridge. I never knew where. Grant removed the folded paper. Lydia studied it silently. After several moments, she exhaled. I haven't seen this in nearly 20 years. The statement hit him harder than expected. 20 years. His father had hidden something important enough to remain untouched for decades. Grant pointed toward the handwritten warning. Why would Dad write that Roy couldn't know? Lydia's expression darkened. I don't know. You trust Roy that little? I trust him less than I used to. The answer felt incomplete. But before Grant could press further, an engine echoed from below. Both of them looked toward the ridge road. A vehicle was climbing, fast, too fast. Moments later, Mara's SUV appeared through the fog. She stepped out carrying a thick waterproof folder. Her face immediately told Grant the situation had changed again. Not improved. Changed. She crossed the yard quickly. We have a problem. Grant felt his stomach tighten. What happened? Mara handed him several printed pages. Investor briefing documents. He scanned the first page, then the second, then the third. His blood went cold. Caleb had moved sooner than expected. The investor tour was happening today, not after the roads fully reopened, today, within hours. He can't be serious, he is. Mara pointed to a schedule attached to the packet. County officials, investors, consultants, media representatives. Grant looked up. Media, regional business press. The meaning was obvious. Caleb wasn't planning a private inspection anymore. He was creating public momentum. If enough investors and officials publicly supported the project, reversing it later would become far more difficult. Even with evidence, even with witnesses, the pressure would become enormous. Grant continued reading. Then he spotted something worse. The Ridge tour route completely avoided Lydia's house. Every stop focused on future development sites, scenic overlooks, luxury lodge locations, infrastructure plans. Nothing about the protected parcel. Nothing about the survival house. Nothing about the trust restrictions. Nothing about Lydia. Caleb intended to sell the story before anyone saw the truth. Mara watched Grant carefully. He knows you're getting close. Grant nodded slowly. He's trying to outrun the evidence. Exactly. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Lydia surprised them both. We're going. Grant looked at her. To the tour. Lydia nodded. Good. Mara smiled faintly. I was hoping you'd say that. An hour later the three of them sat around Lydia's table reviewing everything they possessed. The thermal core notes, the trust summary, Roy's statement, engineering diagrams, medical records, county copies, pages covered the table. Yet Grant felt the same frustration returning. Pieces, they had pieces. Not certainty. Not enough. The missing archive remained the unknown variable. The strongest evidence might still be hidden somewhere in the mountains. Mara eventually tapped the map. We need this. Grant already knew. But the tour starts in 4 hours. Then we split up. Lydia immediately shook her head. No. Both turned toward her. No splitting up. Grant opened his mouth. She stopped him with a raised hand. That's how Caleb wins. The room fell quiet. Lydia looked at each of them carefully. He's isolated people for years. She pointed toward Grant. You were isolated. Then Mara. People who tried helping me were isolated. Finally herself. I was isolated. Her voice remained calm. But not today. Grant felt something shift. Not in the case, in himself. For years he had approached every problem as a business problem. Delegate. Divide tasks. Optimize resources. Lydia was thinking differently. She was thinking about trust, about people, about how Caleb actually operated. And she was right. Mara nodded first. Then we stay together. The decision cost them time, but nobody argued. By mid-morning the roads had improved enough for travel. The three of them left the house together. Grant drove. Mara sat beside him. Lydia remained in the back seat holding the folder of evidence on her lap. The drive toward the map location took them deeper into the mountains, away from paved roads, away from resort property, away from places most people visited. Eventually the road became little more than gravel, then dirt, then mud. Several times Grant considered turning back, but the map kept matching the landscape, the creek, the ridge, the old fire road. Every landmark appeared exactly where his father had drawn it. An hour later they found the final marker, a rusted metal post leaning beside an overgrown trail. Grant stopped the vehicle. No one spoke. The place felt forgotten, almost deliberately erased. They continued on foot. The trail wound through dense forest. Branches scraped their jackets. Wet leaves covered the ground. Then Mara stopped suddenly. Look. Ahead, partially hidden beneath vines and moss, stood a small concrete structure built into the hillside. Not a cabin, not a shed, a vault. Grant's pulse accelerated. The door remained intact, heavy steel, weathered but secure. His father had built it to last. Lydia stared at it with visible emotion. For a moment she looked not at the vault but at memories only she could see. He actually did it, she whispered. Grant stepped forward. The lock mechanism was old but functional. Beside it sat a small metal box. Inside was a key, exactly where someone had intended it to remain. For decades, Grant unlocked the door. The hinges groaned. Cold air drifted outward. Darkness filled the chamber beyond. Mara switched on a flashlight. Rows of shelves appeared, boxes, binders, storage tubes. Dozens of them, more records than Grant had imagined possible. Backup copies. Engineering plans. Trust documents. Correspondence. Everything preserved, everything hidden, everything waiting. For a brief moment nobody moved. Then Grant entered first. He reached the nearest shelf, pulled out a binder. Opened it. His breath caught instantly. Not because of financial records, Not because of trust documents, because the binder contained photographs, hundreds of them. Carefully labeled, dated, organized, adult family members, property meetings, engineering work, legal signings, years of history. Grant flipped through them quickly, then stopped. One photograph had been placed separately inside a protective sleeve, not with the others. Not archived by date, archived as evidence. His hands suddenly felt unsteady, because standing beside Caleb in the photograph was a man Grant recognized immediately, a senior executive from his own company, the same executive who had approved Lydia's relocation paperwork, and in the background, partially visible on a table behind them, sat a stack of documents bearing Lydia Whitmore's name. Mara leaned closer. "What is it?" Grant couldn't answer, because taped beneath the photograph was a handwritten note from his father, a note written years before Caleb's scheme supposedly began, and the first sentence changed everything. "Watch this man. If anything ever happens to Lydia, start with him." The conference room remained silent after the final document was projected onto the screen. Grant sat at one end of the table. Caleb sat at the other. Between them lay months of deception. The board counsel spoke carefully. Every statement had already been reviewed by independent attorneys. Every record had been verified. The handwriting analysis concluded Lydia had not signed the waiver document. The notary logs showed she had never appeared at the listed appointment. The county records matched the original trust restrictions found beneath the survival house, and the emails recovered from company servers revealed something Caleb could no longer explain away. He had known about the planned demolition before the trust issue was ever discussed. He had known the house stood in the way. He had known Lydia remained legally competent, and he had hidden all of it. For a long moment Caleb said nothing. The confidence that once carried him through every meeting had disappeared. Grant watched him carefully. Years of friendship sat between them, years of trust, years of excuses, now none of it mattered. The board vote happened before noon, unanimous. Caleb was removed from leadership immediately. His authority over the mountain project ended that day. His profit participation rights were terminated under misconduct provisions. An independent settlement process required repayment of consulting fees connected to the fraudulent land package. The forged waiver file was referred to state investigators through proper legal channels. No dramatic outburst followed, no confession, no last speech, just consequences. Real ones. The kind that remained long after people stopped arguing. 3 days later, the clinic that had questioned Lydia's capacity issued a formal correction. Mara's documentation revealed undisclosed financial connections between clinic administrators and development interests tied to the resort proposal. The evaluation was withdrawn. Lydia's legal standing was fully restored. For the first time in years, no document anywhere described her as confused. No file claimed she needed someone else to control her decisions. The truth returned to paper, and paper mattered, especially after lies had lived there so long. Roy Bell testified under oath. His promised buyout vanished immediately. He avoided deeper civil exposure only by cooperating fully and providing records of conversations with Caleb's representatives. When he later appeared at Lydia's property, he looked older, smaller somehow. He apologized. Not dramatically, not perfectly, just honestly. Lydia listened. Then she thanked him for finally telling the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. Trust did not return, but neither did bitterness take control. That chapter simply closed. The mountain land remained hers. The demolition permit was cancelled. The county lifted every pending action against the house. Independent engineers inspected the structure and confirmed what Lydia had known all along. The house was not a hazard. It was one of the most remarkable self-sufficient emergency structures any of them had ever seen. The thermal core worked, the ventilation system worked, the shelter design worked. What people had mocked as a strange mud dome turned out to be the strongest structure on the ridge during the storm. Grant stood beside Lydia when the final county letter arrived. She read every page herself. Then she folded it carefully and placed it beside her husband's old engineering notes. The gesture said more than celebration ever could. Weeks later, a community meeting gathered near the property. Local residents, emergency volunteers, county representatives, engineers, people who once laughed at the house, people who once ignored Lydia, people who had survived the blackout. Lydia stood before them and made her own decision. No one made it for her. Part of the property would become a protected emergency shelter available during severe weather events. The trust's original purpose would remain intact. The house would continue serving people. Just as her husband intended, the vote received overwhelming support. For the first time in years, Lydia's voice shaped the future of the mountain. Not Caleb's, not Grant's, hers. After the meeting ended, Mara walked beside Lydia toward the house. "You don't need me much longer," Mara said. Lydia smiled. "That's probably the nicest thing anyone said to me this year." Mara laughed. Their work together wasn't entirely finished, but the crisis was. The role of advocate slowly became friendship, and friendship felt healthier than rescue. Grant stayed nearby through most of those weeks, not because Lydia asked him to, because he chose to. Yet he stopped trying to manage everything. That was the lesson he had learned too late. Money had built resorts, money had built companies, money had built influence, but it had not built presence. It had not built attention, and it certainly had not built trust. One cold morning, another storm approached the mountains, nothing like the previous one, still strong enough to bring old memories. Grant arrived before sunrise. Lydia was already outside preparing the stove. Without speaking, she handed him a stack of split wood. He accepted it, then waited. Years ago, he would have taken over immediately. Today, he waited for instructions. Lydia noticed. A small smile appeared. "Open the lower vent first." Grant obeyed. "The smaller one?" "The smaller one." He adjusted it. She nodded. "Good." The exchange lasted only seconds. Yet it meant more than any apology he could have given. Because listening was harder for him than speaking, together they fed the fire. Together they watched warm air begin moving through the hidden channels beneath the house. The system worked exactly as designed, a family legacy hidden beneath the floor. Not wealth, not status. Wisdom, resilience, preparation, care, the things nobody had valued until they needed them. Grant glanced toward the old demolition stake leaning against a wall. He picked it up. The wood was dry enough to burn. Without thinking, he carried it toward the stove. Lydia immediately stopped him. "No." Grant looked surprised. She took the stake from his hands, then walked it back to the front door. Carefully, she planted it beside the entrance, like a marker, like a warning, like a memory. "What for?" he asked quietly. Lydia looked at the stake, then at the mountains beyond it. "So nobody forgets." Grant followed her gaze. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the trees, the stove crackled softly, and for the first time in years, the house no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like home. If you were in Grant's position, would you have risked everything to expose the truth? Let us know what you think in the comments.